Mountains turned into self-contained bunkers, huge stretches of desert used for testing deadly chemicals, islands where the deadliest animal diseases are studied, and secret data centers that track everything you do. These are American locations the government quietly blocked off. The Utah Data Center in Bluffdale is one of the most secretive government facilities you've probably never heard of. That's why it's secret. It's massive, covering about 1 million square feet. It's basically designed to collect, store, and analyze enormous amounts of digital data. Emails, texts, phone calls. This is the NSA's way of monitoring potential threats anywhere in the world. Security here is insanely tight. The building is surrounded by fences, cameras, and armed guards, and the airspace above is heavily restricted. In order for it to run smoothly, the walls are thick and the server rooms are climate controlled down to the tiniest detail. You'll never have a problem with internet crashing at this place. Almost nothing about what goes on site has ever been officially revealed though. Journalists and researchers who've tried to report on it usually end up with very little actual confirmed information. What we do know is that it is involved in mass surveillance. Raven Rock is this enormous underground bunker carved into a mountain in Pennsylvania. They built it back in the early 50s. It's a backup Pentagon. If something catastrophic happened to the capital, the military could keep running from inside this mountain. Raven Rock has its own power plants, water reservoirs, everything you'd need to survive completely cut off from the outside world. Supposedly, it could hold around 3,000 people during an emergency. There is a dental area, a medical area, a dining hall, dorms. It sounds pretty utilitarian, but I bet they have entertainment areas in there too. I mean, they have to. And this place is actually used. It's not just sitting there in case of emergency, but pretty much everything that goes on inside is classified. Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado has a facility many of us have heard about, but almost nobody's ever seen. Buried under about 2,000 feet of solid granite, it used to be the main nerve center for NORAD's aerospace warning and defense operations. Inside the mountain, they built 15 of these 3-story buildings. And all of these buildings are mounted on over 1,000 giant springs. The springs absorb shock from earthquakes, explosions, nuclear blasts. They actually designed this place to survive a 30 megaton nuclear explosion happening just over a mile away. There are these massive blast doors that can seal off different sections, and it's also able to handle high altitude electromagnetic pulses, meaning if there was some kind of nuclear attack that shut down electronics everywhere, this place would still be running. It's probably one of the safest places on the planet. It's been downgraded from its original Cold War mission, but it still operates as a backup command center. Mount Weather is a mountain in Virginia, but underneath it, there's this bunker called the High Point Special Facility. This place was built to house high-ranking military or politicians during a catastrophe. It built it during the Cold War, and it's fully equipped with everything. It has its own water supply, power generators, communication systems, and not only did they make it functional, they made it livable. Again, not sure what kind of entertainment they have down there, but I've heard of there being big movie theaters in some of these places, which doesn't sound all that outlandish. Mount Weather also works as one of FEMA's main command centers. During a crisis, they can coordinate emergency response from there, broadcast communications, and use it as a relocation point for important government branches. It's actually pretty well known. The government doesn't hide that it exists, they just don't tell you anything about what actually happens inside. Dugway Proving Ground is this huge remote army testing facility in Utah's Great Salt Lake Desert. Since 1942, they've been running experiments on chemical and biological weapons. These days, it is less about offensive use and more about figuring out how to detect these things and survive them. Supposedly, that is. They've got these huge target areas marked with perfect circles. That's where they release test chemicals and track how they spread under different weather conditions. Things have gone wrong here before. In 1968, a nerve agent called VX accidentally got outside the base, killed a bunch of sheep. That's the kind of stuff they're working with. Obviously, you can't just visit Dugway, but back in 2014, they let a photographer named David Maisel in, but only after months of vetting, and he had to be escorted the entire time. Dugway Proving Ground became an obsession for him long before he ever set foot inside. Back in 2003, he was flying over the Great Salt Lake for another project when he noticed this strange grid of tiny buildings lined up in perfect rows. It turned out to be an army depot where the US had been storing around 30 million pounds of aging chemical weapons. Everything from mustard gas to sarin, all the worst stuff you can think of. He tried to get permission in 2004 to visit, but the Pentagon denied him, obviously. But almost a decade later, in 2014, they finally gave him the green light. He started on the ground, photographing the structures built to test how chemical agents spread. Later, he moved to the air, snapping images of those massive circles and grids carved into the desert floor that I talked about earlier. Plum Island is this small island off the coast of Long Island, New York. It's home to the Plum Island Animal Disease Center, where the government researches some of the most dangerous animal diseases. The facility has been around since 1954. They set it up to study foreign animal diseases, and right now, it's one of the only places in the entire United States where they work with live foot and mouth disease samples. This virus spreads insanely fast in animals, so most labs aren't allowed anywhere near it. They also did biological weapon research targeting livestock here during the Cold War. They stopped doing that in 1969. The island is completely locked down, only authorized personnel are allowed in, and they work in biosafety level 3 labs because some of these pathogens are incredibly dangerous. One mistake and you could have a disease outbreak. There's actually a controversial future for Plum Island though. The facility is being phased out and there's plans to close it around 2028. They're moving operations to a new lab in Kansas, and people have some mixed feelings about that. Some think it's safer to keep this kind of research on, an island where containment is obviously easier, but others think a modern facility makes more sense. The Hanford Site in Washington State is this massive contaminated area left over from America's Cold War nuclear program. During World War II and the years after, Hanford produced plutonium for nuclear weapons. Today, it's one of the most contaminated sites in the entire country, and huge sections are completely off limits to the public. The site covers about 580 square miles. Most of it is a secured zone because of all the radioactive and chemical waste left behind from decades of weapons production. The groundwater under large parts of this site is still way above safe pollution limits, and that's after decades of cleanup. A lot of the danger comes from these massive underground tanks filled with radioactive sludge. They were only ever meant to be temporary, but now everyone's trying to figure out how to safely deal with what's inside them. It's going to take decades to fully clean up. Y-12 in Oak Ridge, Tennessee is one of the central hubs of America's nuclear weapons programs. They built it during the Manhattan Project, and it's still running today, doing basically the same kind of work. The main mission at Y-12 is handling weapons-grade uranium. They make parts for nuclear warheads, they take old ones apart, store the material, and they supply uranium for some of the Navy's nuclear subs. As you can imagine, security is incredibly tight here. It's not open to public tours, period. Some of the older buildings that handled plutonium and enriched uranium are so dangerous they're being deactivated or just torn down. It's a huge environmental effort happening behind the scenes just to keep contamination contained. Kings Bay in Georgia plays a huge role in what's called the nuclear triad, the 3 ways the US could deliver nuclear weapons: by land, by aircraft, and by submarines. Kings Bay is responsible for the submarine part. It's a naval submarine base, one of the most strategic bases in the US. This is where the country keeps its Ohio-class nuclear ballistic missile submarines, basically giant submarines built to carry long-range nuclear missiles called Trident missiles. These subs are a major part of how the US deters nuclear attacks because they can hide deep in the ocean and still launch a strike if needed. Kings Bay also has a huge repair and maintenance center called the Trident Refit Facility, where crews work on the subs so they can stay out at sea for long stretches of time. There's also the Strategic Weapons Facility, which is where they store and handle the nuclear warheads. Extremely dangerous work, and the base has training areas for submarine crews. The land around the base is fenced off, the waterfront is restricted, and there's constant monitoring. So, Fort Knox. Basically, this massive vault sitting inside an army base in Kentucky, it holds an enormous amount of gold. To say this place is insanely locked down would be an understatement. The vault door is 21 inches thick, 21 inches. Not only does it weigh over 20 tons, it's also made from this special steel that drills and torches can't even get through. So you're not breaking the door, but what about the combination? Well, that is on a 100-hour time clock. That means even if you had the combination, you couldn't just open it whenever you wanted. The timer has to to run out first. We've also got fences all around it, night vision cameras everywhere, microphones picking up the smallest of sounds, and the US Mint police constantly patrolling. Nobody even knows the full combination to open the door. Each staff member only knows their piece of it, so you'd need multiple people just to get it open. Almost nothing ever leaves this vault. They take tiny test samples during audits every now and then, but actual gold moving in or out, that barely happens. Well, I've been your host, James. I'll catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video.